Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another live dairy tour. I'm your host, Callie Akabishin, and I work on behalf of our dairy farmers in the Southeast. As a registered dietitian, I help teach people about delicious dairy and connect them with the amazing farmers who make it possible. And this is one of my favorite parts about my job. Today, our team is at the East Tennessee Research and Education Center, Little River Animal and Environmental Unit, with team members Cody Hash and Pate Walker. Named for the waterway surrounding its perimeter, Little River is home to over 300 dairy cows and is a 539-acre field laboratory, meaning that in addition to milking cows, their farm hosts studies that evaluate the interaction between animal agriculture and the environment. Together with special guest Tara Vander Dussen, we will learn how the dairy operates, along with the types of practices used to ensure that dairy farmers are helping to protect the planet while producing nutritious milk. We are so excited to have Tara, previously known as the New Mexico Milk Maid on social media, joining us to tour the farm and share her own perspective on sustainability in farming. Along with being a fifth-generation dairy farmer in New Mexico, Tara has spent the past 9 years working as an environmental scientist, assisting clients with things like water conservation, sustainable management practices, and nutrient and irrigation management. I want to be sure that you know how to get your questions through to us on this live tour. So if you're joining on Zoom, use the Q&A feature. If you're watching on Facebook, put your questions in the chat or comment section. We're going to answer as many as we can, and we don't want you to be shy. We really want to hear from you. We want to know what your questions are. Plus, for those watching on Facebook Live, keep your eyes out for a link in the comment section later on to tell us what you think of the tour with a survey. Now, let's not waste any more time. Cody, I'm going to turn it over to you and Tara. Where are you taking Tara first?
Welcome to Little River Dairy. We are under the UT Ag Research umbrella, so we are part of several centers in the unit. So first, we're going to start in the milking parlor. This is where most of the action happens. Our cows are milked twice a day. We're milking roughly 192 cows right now, averaging about 85, 86 pounds, and that's roughly about 10 gallons of milk per day for reference. So as our cows are milked twice a day, they're milked in a double 8 herringbone, meaning that they can 8 cows on one side and then 8 cows on the other side. And as they enter the parlor, we have a standard operating milking procedure that is standard across all employees here that work at the dairy and is in the milking, observing in the milking process. So they are prepped and cleaned and attach that milking unit. And then when that cow is at that point of less milk, that takeoff or that milking unit will be automatically taken off from the cow. So, and as that happens, as every cow is done in the milking parlor, they'll be let out, go back to their environment that they're in, and we'll show that a little bit further. So these cows are milked, as I said, twice a day, 5:30 in the morning and 5:30 in the afternoon approximately. So, and one of the things that we stress about in the parlor is to reduce stress. So we try to keep it a calm and welcoming environment into the parlor. And we stress that in our employees and also any research that might be going on at the time, that any kind of questions that people might have. You'll observe that our parlor is a little bit wider than a normal conventional dairy. We have this set up for research and teaching purposes because we are a research and teaching unit. So we have classes come in, they might want to learn how to milk a cow. So we have that space available for that observation and hands-on learning, and it's also being used for researchers to be able to take samples and get their data that they need to answer their questions that we're facilitating here at the dairy. So we're not only a conventional dairy, but we also have a research side that we try to push and make sure everybody's aware of that, because that's answering a lot of the questions in the dairy industry as of late. So
things about cows, as you know, they are big time creatures of habit. They love to do the same exact thing every single day. And so you mentioned that you milk the cows at the same time every day. So if you were at the dairy, you would see that when it's cows' turn to get milk, they will start lining up at their pen ready to head into the barn. And in the barn, they like to do the exact same thing every single time they come in. And so that can help reduce their stress, as well as keeping that schedule exactly the same. We're going to be taking you through kind of what happens. Cody's going to be taking you through through what happens with the milk stream. But one of my favorite things in the barn is actually the water. And we're going to be following the water stream throughout the dairy, talking about how we use water on the dairy. But one of the things that I love about water use on the dairy is how many times we recycle water on the dairy. We recycle a single gallon of water 4 to 5 times over and over again throughout the dairy. So we're going to be looking at all of those different ways we recycle. And one of the ways that we recycle water on the dairy is the water that you see that is used to clean the equipment behind me will ultimately get reused to clean the floor in the back of the barn. And then we're going to see other ways it's used throughout the process on the dairy. So stay tuned for that.
And before we move on, as we move on, we can kind of talk about this. We're getting a couple questions in from our viewers. So the first question we have that's relevant to this section is, how many times do you have to milk a cow to get a gallon of milk?
So to answer that question fully, so that cow will come in the parlor and we will prep that animal to let that milk down. So she will give about roughly 40 to 50 pounds of milk in one milking. So in saying that 2 milkings gives about 85 pounds, that's the 2 milkings. So to give that in perspective of an 85 pounds, that's roughly 10 gallons. So it'll be a 10 gallon per day on average that we produce here at the dairy. So to give that reference to how many gallons that cow milks, it'll be roughly a 10 gallon perspective.
So and cows are milked. Cows are milked for about, it's like between 5 and 8 minutes per milking. So to even put that into further perspective, that's about 1 gallon a minute for each time that they're milking. So it's pretty amazing to see how much our girls produce and how much milk they provide for all of us.
Oh, that's really interesting. I never thought about it that way. 1 gallon per minute. Wow. Very impressive. So I think we're going to move on and, we're going to go to our next stop and we're going to meet some of the, we're going to go into the parlor here for a second and maybe we can talk a little bit about, what happens when a cow gets sick and are you still milking that cow and how do we make sure that there's no antibiotics in the milk that people are drinking?
Yes. So as we just entered our tank room, so the milk will start in the parlor from the cow and it'll travel through a filter system that we have to make sure any kind of debris that might accidentally get into that milk, and we want to try to eliminate that before it gets into our tank. And as it's flowing, after it flows through there, we will use what is called a plate cooler, and that actually will circulate cold water through right next to that hot milk, so we could cool that milk down as fast as we can before we get it to our holding tank. And in saying that, the fastest we can get that milk down to about 37 degrees, 36 degrees Fahrenheit, coming from a cow is about 102 degrees. So the fastest we can get that milk down, the better quality milk that that we can sell to our processor. And we sell to Dairy Farmers of America. So they come and pick up our milk every other day. And so we have that plate cooler, and saying that and going back to what we recycle, and so water recycle. So we use that to cool our milk down, and we also use that to wash our parlor and get it clean. So we can reuse that water, and that also goes into our lagoon that we can also use to flush our barn and keep our barn clean. So that also goes back to that water quality and be able to reuse our resources.
All of that. So you'll get to see each piece of that. So one of the things with the milk that I like to think about to give people some reference. So you mentioned that milk comes out of the cow at just over 100 degrees. So think about a really, really warm bath. That's how hot that milk comes out. And then ultimately it cools down as cold as your refrigerator is. So it's really quickly how quickly it cools that milk down and gets it ready to head off to be processed into bottles. Cheese. We make a lot of cheese in New Mexico. So wherever it's going to go, we cool it all the way down to that refrigerator temperature.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, well, and one of the other safe checks that we have on the dairy here, we actually check if there's any antibiotics before we sell to Dairy Farmers of America. So we actually have a testing site on our facility here to make sure that we're not selling any milk that has antibiotics in it. And if it does, we have to let that milk go down the drain, because it's very important that we is antibiotic free and is a wholesome product for processors to make into products such as Tara was explaining us.
Single tanker of milk can be tested almost 3 times per tanker. So it's tested here at the farm, it's tested at the processing plant, it's tested a number of times throughout. So every tanker is tested so many times.
Okay, well, let's move on to our next section. We're gonna go over and visit some of our calves. And I think, as a dietitian, I often see that there is some confusion with the antibiotics because some milk labels say antibiotic free, some don't. And that's really a labeling difference. It has nothing to do with the fact that some milk contains antibiotics and some don't. But Cody and Tara gave us some great insight on the steps that farmers take to ensure that the cows are comfortable while being milked and that the milk they produce is safe to drink. On top of keeping the dairy going, farmers are simultaneously trying to juggle how to do it while protecting the environment. So while we make our way to this next stop, we're going to show a short video highlighting the role that U.S. dairy is playing to ensure that milk is produced in a sustainable manner. We know that all food production is going to come with an environmental footprint. And this video does a great job of showing that, what the current footprint is for dairy. Were you surprised to learn that according to the EPA, all agriculture, meaning plant and animal in the US, provides just 10% of the total greenhouse gas emissions? What about that research shows that dairy produces less than 2%? Even so, the US dairy industry knows that we can still do better and is working towards a goal of being net zero or better by 2050. It looks like we've made it to our next stop on the tour, which is also the cutest stop. So tell our viewers where we are now, Cody.
Yeah, so we're located now at our calf facility. We have a calf unit area that we call a calf daycare. So they are brought here at birth, and we will house them until they're about 3 or 4 months of age. So at birth, we give them high quality colostrum that we collect from that cow in the milking parlor, and we will give that calf that colostrum within that 24-hour period. And then they will be given a transition milk, meaning that's that second milking from the cow. So that will be given the next 24 hours, and then a transition into a milk powder or a replacer that we give to that calf up until about 60 days when we actually will wean that calf from that milk. So we do have a lot of vaccinations that will supplement that, try to get that calf's immune system to where it needs to be after birth, because they are born without an immune system. So that colostrum is very important to get to that calf and be able to help that calf fight off any kind of disease or bacteria that calf might encounter if it's lifetime. So it'll be transferred into an individual pen. As you can see, with they're housed individually for about 2 weeks to make sure they're pretty healthy and ready to go. And about 2 weeks after that, they'll be transferred to a group area where they'll be housed in about 5 to 10 calves at a time. We've seen a better behavior and immunity on this step, and having the calves together, it's a lot easier for the calves to interact with each other and have a better environment for the calf, ventilation, access to each other, and the environment that the calf is in. So we found a good benefit on that, and to sustain that calf's well-being on throughout after she is weaned. And we will then take that calf to a larger paddock where all the weaned calves will be housed. And through that time period, we'll give that calf, as I mentioned earlier, more vaccinations to make sure that their immunity is the best that it can be in case they encounter any kind of illness that calf might in its environment.
Yeah, more on the vaccine. So just like if your parents may take you to the doctor to get your shots and your vaccines, it's the same with our calves. We have a veterinarian that plans our vaccine protocol. Our calves have a shot record so that we know exactly when and what vaccines they got. And we protect against a number of different illnesses that calves experience to be able to prevent them, because really these small calves, it's hard to think about because it's going to take 2 years till they grow up and are adults, but these are the future of our herd. So making sure they're healthy from day one is a priority in our calf management area.
Okay, we have about 2 more minutes here with the calves. But I think a question that we often get in terms of calves is when do they have their first baby?
So roughly here at the UT Dairy, we have the first heifers calve in with their first calf at around 2 years of age. So at around 2 years, they'll have that first calf, and that calf will be brought here just like she was 2 years ago. So, and when she calves in, that cow will be taken to the lactating herd, and that calf will be raised here just like she was. And so that's a 2-year cycle usually, and then that next calf, she'll have another calf hopefully in the next year. So it'll keep that cycle going.
So one thing we haven't talked about yet, if you don't mind us talking about, is the bedding. So the bedding, we're going to share some of the differences between the dairy farm here in Tennessee and my family dairy farm back in New Mexico. And the bedding is one of them. So you guys grow all your own hay for bedding. In New Mexico, we actually have a lot of peanuts that get turned into peanut butter. And the leftover product is peanut shells. So we use peanut shells for the bedding for our calves to be able to recycle a product, use a local product that's available to us.
That's a really good comparison. And I hope to continue to make those between the two different farms. You know, while we're with these calves, we did get a question from the audience, and they're asking, and then we're going to move on. But this question is, how does a farmer decide which heifers are bred? And, the question is, which heifers are bred and which are kept lactating for milk production, I guess. But maybe you could speak to that question for our audience.
Yeah, so we keep, as the heifers are born here on this facility, we actually keep or retain all females. So, and we will raise them to a breeding age, and then we'll have them calve in and be kept here on the farm. So we keep all of our females for lactating animals. So we keep the calves, and then they'll be raised in a different area, and then we'll be brought back to the lactating herd, and then it'll just continue that cycle throughout our lifetime.
And New Mexico is similar. We have one difference. So some of our cows, instead of being bred to Holstein, are actually bred to what's called a cross. And so they're raised for beef cows. And then our male cows are all raised at a local rancher's ranch as well for beef. And then we, the same as you guys, retain all of the female Holstein heifers to be brought into our milking string.
Okay, well, let's make our way over to the barn, and if you couldn't tell already, based on the effort that they take with the calves, the success of the dairy farm is highly reliant on maintaining the health and well-being of these calves. But the high level of care and attention to detail doesn't stop with the calves. Farmers know that the happy, healthy cows, they're going to produce more milk. So this matters when we talk about sustainability, because having less cows produce more milk can decrease environmental impacts. So taking care of their cows actually helps farmers make dairy more sustainable. But as Tara mentioned, this cow care is going to look different from farm to farm, depending on what their farm is like, what the geographic location is like. So I'm interested to hear more about that as we look at the barn. I think we're now at the barn where the cows spend a pretty decent majority of their time, I would think.
Yeah, so one of the biggest differences you're going to see between New Mexico and Tennessee, looking from the outside, is actually this barn. So this barn, Cody's going to share more about it. but the cows are, located inside a barn to protect them from the elements, the weather. Tennessee gets a lot more rain, which we'll talk about, than New Mexico. So in New Mexico, our cows are what's called, they're on a facility called an open lot. So all the cows are in outdoor pens and are out in the sunshine every single day. And the reason for that is really a climate issue. No matter what farm you're at, no matter where it's at, you want to care for your cows the best way you can in your area. So while you guys are in barns, ours are outdoors, and that's all really related back to cow care.
That's a good comparison, Tara. So our freestall barn is set up to where we're able to keep the cows' comfort in mind. So you can probably hear the fans blowing on the cows to try to keep the cows cool. We also have a misting system that will spray that cow's back when the fan is on. So we can have that as another way of controlling that, helping that cow be able to sustain that heat, because we get a lot of humidity and a lot of heat during the summertime here in Tennessee. So we have to keep the cows comfortable and cool, because if we can keep them comfortable and stress-free environment, then they can give us a higher quality milk product. So you can probably see there's a sand bedding, a freestall area that the cow is able to lay down. She's able to eat, drink, do whatever she needs to do during the day. So she is able to roam free in a pen of cows with her. So we're able to keep that bedding clean. And if we can keep that environment as clean as we can, then we'll be able to reduce the amount of bacteria that cow is exposed to, meaning that in the future when she's milking, that'll give us a higher quality milk product if we can keep that cow's environment as clean as possible as well. So we do have a flush system that helps with that. The flush system will go clean all the manure and debris away from the cow's environment. That also will help to keep that environment clean, so she's not exposed to as much manure. So, and that also gives that cow the ability to roam free in that pen.
So while Cody cows are laying on a nice beach with their sand, back in New Mexico, our cows are bedded with compost. That makes it's nice and fluffy and airy. So when they lay down, it's really comfortable and soft, which is extremely important. These are big animals, so you want to make sure when they lay down, it's really soft and comfortable. And we clean their pens every single day. Cody here mentioned the flush system. So that flush system is another step in our water recycling process. So we talked about the water being used in the barn. Well, all the water that's used in the barn is collected and recycled to flush out these lanes. So that is about step 3 on our water recycling.
Very good.
Well, that's great to hear about that water recycling. Again, it's coming up multiple times throughout this tour. Real quick, I want to interject and let our Facebook Live attendees know that there's going to be a link in the comments section to complete a survey. Your feedback is really important to us. We really want to know how we're doing. We'd love to hear from you. And don't worry, to those of you watching on Zoom, you're going to get a chance at the end of this tour, you're going to get a link pop up to do that same survey. But while we're in the barn, I see there's a bunch of stuff on the ground, and I'm a dietitian, so of course I love food. So I was hoping we could talk a little bit about what the cows eat and kind of all the decisions that go into, why you make those choices for the cows.
Yeah, so we have a total mixed ration, a TMR that is formulated for that cow's needs of milk production and sustainability of herself. And we have that formulated by a nutritionist that will look at, how much our cow is producing, and then we'll formulate that ration to meet her dietary needs. So we feed our cows twice a day to make sure that feed is the fresh as it can be. And so we grow most of our forages here on farm. So we have a corn silage based hay and a grain mixture that we supplement for vitamins and minerals, and to keep that ration as close to what she needs as possible, because we try to meet that need of that animal day in and day out. And we feed all year long, twice a day. So we try to keep the freshest feed in front of that animal as possible.
Yeah, so a couple more things about the feed that are really interesting. As people, we talk about, buying local. Well, cows have been local since the very beginning. A lot of their ingredients are locally sourced foods. So what Cody feeds his cows here might look a little different than what I feed my cows in New Mexico, just based on what's available. So cows have this really amazing, what I like to call superpower. They take foods that we can't eat, like things like hay and grass, and are able to turn it into nutrient rich products like beef and milk and yogurt and butter and all of our favorite products. And again, Cody mentioned that a nutritionist plans all of their diets. So everything that we're adding in. So one example is in New Mexico, we have a lot of cotton grown by us. So there's a lot of cotton seed, which cotton seed is a leftover byproduct from making cotton. And we're able to feed that to our cow as a great source of protein. And that's just one example. There's tons of examples like that. We can sell our cow or feed our cows grocery store waste, brewery waste, all these things that would normally be considered waste that are actually really great feed for cows, and they're able to upcycle it. And Cody mentioned the nutritionist. Just like Callie, a nutritionist plans every meal on the diet for all of our cows where they're at in their stage of life.
Yeah, I always love to hear about all the different byproducts. When talking to people, like, do you like beer? Well, some cows eat the byproducts of that. And, are you wearing a t-shirt? Well, that also plays a role into what cows eat. So I think we're kind of moving.
That's one of our biggest parts of our sustainability story. And it's not just our sustainability story, it's other farmers, part of their sustainability story as well. We can make other farms more sustainable by feeding their byproducts to our cows.
For sure. I think, we're going to get to some of these questions. I've kind of flagged them for our upcoming section. But one of the questions that we've been talking a lot about water, Cody, maybe you can speak to this. Is the water coming from a municipal source or well? And they're asking, this will help lead us into, I think we're going to get to talking about our waterways here. Is the final used water discharged to the river?
Yeah, so most of our water is city water. So it is municipal water that we use but that starts in the parlor area, and it'll start also in the flush system. So once it gets used up in the parlor area, it'll be transferred to a lagoon, as we're headed that way right now. We'll talk more about where it goes from the lagoon and then out to our fields for fertilizer. So as I was mentioned, the flush system, with that, all that water comes from basically starts at the parlor, and we'll be able to use that to flush our barn. And then as it travels down our sand collection lane, all that sand that the cows has kicked out in their beds, we can reuse that sand. So it'll travel down a lane where the sand and the manure and water will separate, and we'll be able to collect that sand every day, and we'll be able to reuse that in the cows' bedding. So we'll be able to collect the sand, and we'll also be able to reuse that water. So when that water is sent through a separator, it separates the solids from the liquids. So we can use the solids for fertilizer, and then we can reuse that water for another step and flushing our farm or our barn to make sure the cow's environment is clean. And then when that gets at the level where we need to transfer it, that'll be transferred to our fields once we're at that capacity.
Yeah, in New Mexico, we actually use groundwater is where most of our water comes from for our barns. So another great difference. And then as Cody mentioned, the cow manure, not everyone likes to talk about cow manure, but cow manure is a really important part of our dairy farm because it's ultimately what we use as fertilizer to grow our crops to feed our cows. So, and the same with the water that's collected on the dairy. We also collect all the rainwater from our facilities in our lagoon. So we can use all of that water to water our crops. So it really comes full circle.
Yeah, and you guys answered, one of the questions was, is all the manure washed to the lagoon? How is the lagoon managed? But I think we answered that question about how that manure is used in the lagoon. And then one last question about the barn, and then I'm going to intro and show us a little video about kind of tying that idea of the water recycling together. But people are asking, do your cows ever graze on pasture, or are they always in the barn? And I think this is a good opportunity to talk about cow comfort and why different cows are in barns, pastures, and depending on the location.
Yeah, so here in the Southeast, we like to keep our cows in a barn. That way they can be out of the weather. When the cows are lactating and they're being milked, we try to keep their environment as comfortable and being able to help that cow meet that milk production need. So they do enter a dry period. What is called a vacation for the cows is about 2 months before they calve back in. They'll actually be put on a pasture, and they're able to have a little bit of refresher before they calve back in and start lactating. So we will move them out to pasture and then actually bring them back in to the barn when they give birth again.
Yeah, and so every farm is a little bit different how this goes. So we sometimes will put our heifers, so our young cows, out on pasture. Sometimes we'll put dry cows. But for us, if you've been to Mexico, there's not a lot of like green fields. So for us, most of our cows' diets and food actually comes from the total mixed ration that Cody talked about. So our cows are not out on pasture very often, but our cows are in the open lot, the open corral areas. And again, this really, all of it goes back to what is the most comfortable for the cow based on the area you're in. So there's not a right or a wrong answer to any of this. It's really about what's best for the dairy farm, where it's at, and for those cows that they have. So every dairy farm is going to look a little different.
Awesome. Well, Tara, I so appreciate having you on this tour. And then, of course, Cody's perspective, just hearing how each farm is going to differ and showcasing this idea that the best and most sustainable solution for every farm doesn't always look the same. So we talked about ways farmers recycle water, and here's a video that's going to tie that all together. Well, it's really neat to see exactly how farmers recycle water on their farm, starting with the cooling the milk all the way down to using it for irrigation for the crops. I know that I'm not recycling water that much in my own home. It makes me wonder, should I be more conscious of that? As previously mentioned in the intro, this farm, Little River, was named for the waterways surrounding it. So this means that the team at Little River must take multiple precautions to keep the waterways safe. And I know we had some questions that were kind of asking about this, and I'm hoping that this section really helps explain how they keep those waterways safe. So we're speaking with Cody's counterpart on our tour today now, and this is Tate, who's going to talk on this topic. Tate, can you speak about how the farm keeps the waterways safe and why that's so important?
Yes, ma'am. As Tara and Cody has mentioned today, we're probably at our final stop with our water recycling, which is probably 5 to 7, depending on how many times we can recycle it through the barn. Behind me is a 4 million gallon holding tank that supplies our irrigation system that we finally put it on approximately 215 acres of cropland outside. But around every one of our cropping fields, we have a field buffer or a field border. And we do that because of 2 reasons. Is we have a lot of water, surface water runoff. We have roughly 54 to 56 inches of rainfall per year. So we look at that water runoff, so that way we plant that in a hay field that we can use and recycle the hay to go in our bedding or different areas. And it's roughly 15 to 20 acres around our fields, but it's essential for the stewardship of the environment to keep any kind of runoff going through that buffer. Also on the farm, we have 15 groundwater wells that we test the water. And like it said in the intro, we're surrounded by the Little River, Joy Creek, and a wet weather conveyance that runs through the farm. So monthly, we test those things for nutrient runoff and those things. Also on the farm, we have 2 constructed wetlands that all the runoff will go through the denitrification process as it goes through the wetland before it enters creek or the streams adjacent to the farm.
First, but one of the things that we're trying to watch out for, you mentioned all of the surface water. So in New Mexico, we're really concerned about groundwater and making sure we protect groundwater. So again, just those slight differences in where you're at. So what we do is similar to what Tate said, we test all of our wells to see if there's any nutrients that are reaching the groundwater. Our groundwater can be anywhere from 100 to 500 feet deep. So you're talking about some really deep spaces. We also test all of the lagoon water so we can figure out exactly how much nutrients is available in that water. So when we go to apply it out on the fields, we make sure we apply just enough so the crop gets what it needs, so there's not a lot of extra. We also sample all of our soils and test them for nitrogen, phosphorus, all sorts of different things, especially depending on where you're located, what you're going to be testing for, just to make sure we're giving the crops what they need, but not more than what they need.
Well, again, this is just another example of kind of all the work the farmers do to keep the environment safe, from everything from testing the cows with the milking and testing the waterways. I know that before I worked with dairy farmers, I had no idea the amount of science and testing and, just all the decisions that go into making this. So, I really thank Tate and Cody and Tara for that insight on dairy farming and waterway protection. Overall, this has just been a really great experience hearing about the work that dairy farmers are doing to help protect our environment. We're going to wrap up now and answer any last minute questions you have. So I'm going to pause for 1 second. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We want to answer them. And if we don't get any more questions, I always have a favorite questions that I like to ask our dairy farmers. And the one I'll start with, Tara, is, what do you wish people knew about being a dairy farmer?
Yeah, so that's such a great question, one I get all the time. And I think instead of thinking about what I wish people knew, what I wish people did was I wish people got to know a local dairy farmer or other farms. I mean, there's all sorts of different types of farmers out there, but get to know someone local to you, or look for somebody online that's sharing about dairy farming, a farmer that's sharing, on Instagram or Facebook. Build a relationship with them so that when you have questions, when you see something online or you see something in the grocery store that you want to know about, you can go right to the farmer and ask them a question. So that's what I really wish people did is just get to know your farmers.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to make. I always, when I'm talking with students, try to remind people we have a lot more in common. We're all trying to do the same thing here. And I think it's important to remember that farmers are protecting the environment, but they're also trying to nourish the world. And that's a big job right now. I think that's a lot. We don't have any more questions coming in. Another good question that I think would be good for our audience is, where can people go to learn more reliable information on the environment, about agriculture, things like that?
Yeah, so we're here today with the Dairy Alliance. So I think that's a great place to start. The Dairy Alliance will have lots of great resources, tips, tools, information. They may be able to connect you with some local farmers, give you just great videos and just resources for you to learn more about dairy farming. If you're looking for a farmer to follow, you can follow me online at Tara Vander Dussen on Instagram. And I'm happy to answer any questions there. I know we had one question that, Callie, you and I talked about too, is how cow comfort plays back into sustainability. So if there's no questions, maybe we could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I'd love to expand on that. If you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so one of the biggest pieces of our sustainability story, it might seem a little out of place, but it is cow comfort. The cow comfort and making sure that the cow is healthy, and we talked about being stress-free and just relaxed and comfortable. That helps the cow produce more milk. And so if a single cow can produce more milk, that means that there's less cows that we need for the same amount of milk, which less cows means less manure, less water use, less feed, and all of that ultimately equals a lower carbon footprint. So dairy farmers, I think you have some great facts, Callie, about dairy farmers reducing their carbon footprint over the last 70 years, setting some really big goals for the future to be carbon neutral.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I really appreciate you bringing that in as we kind of tie up this whole idea, is that it really comes back to, there's individual things that farmers are doing, but as a whole, it's really just prioritizing that cow care is a huge piece of it. So just a reminder to our Facebook attendees that the link to our farm tour survey is still in the comments section. Again, we really want to hear from you. And to those watching on Zoom, that survey is going to appear at the end of the tour along with in your email. With so few people having connections to agriculture anymore, this is just a great opportunity to share what happens on a dairy farm. If we don't know, we're more susceptible to kind of questions and wondering, and it's so great to really just get this face-to-face interaction, even though it is virtual, to really hear what happens on a farm. So we hope you enjoyed today's tour as much as we did, and we'll share what you learn with your friends and your family. I also want to extend a huge thanks to the team at Little River and Tara. We know that spare time is not something that farmers have a lot of, so the willingness to share some of it with us and their farm is just really appreciated. Lastly, don't forget the Dairy Alliance is your resource for all things dairy. So visit our website at thedairyalliance.com for the latest dairy research, recipes, and news. You can even take more virtual farm tours and meet more of our incredible dairy farm families across the Southeast. Thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate you sharing our time with us. We wish you a dairy good day. That's all for now.